theories? Erickson and who's the other guy? Freud, right? We had two different psychoanalytic theorists that we talked about. Freud had his psychosexual stages, and Erickson rather, had his psychosocial, right? What was the big takeaway, if you had to give me a couple of the bigger points of those guys? Or the differences, or how psychoanalytic theories in general apply to personality development? What would you say? What was Freud's, if you had to sum it up in a sentence or two, what would you say? What's Freud's main focus? 2 words, maybe. Where's that stuff found? If it had to be one word to describe, to more general than that, what is Freud really interested in? Where's all the information he's interested in? Where does everything happen? In the unconscious, right? That would be, if nothing else, we're going to think of Freud and the unconscious, because that's where everything is sort of happening that he's interested in. So we know we've got all these unconscious processes happening. It's the resolution of these conflicts that are in our unconscious, right, that affect us and our personality development, how we go through life. Now, where do the conflicts come from? Now we can talk about those stages. Right, so we talked a little bit about, right, if something happens maybe in those stages, we could see personality issues come to light maybe down the road. Okay, all right, so those could be some of the general descriptors of Freud's theory of personality development. What about Erickson? 1 or 2 sentences to describe his general ideas. Early childhood, but he also goes, remember, a little later. He starts in early childhood, but he goes a little longer than Freud. Right? Freud sort of, at adolescence, thinks that we're sort of where we need to be. And Erickson's stages of development go right up to when? What's that? Even further. Yeah, adulthood, right? Late adulthood. So really, I guess up until death could be the final, right? And then what were Erickson's major thoughts on how we develop our personality? We go through those stages throughout the lifespan, and what happens in each of his 8 stages? What needs to happen according to Erickson? Each stage is a what? Think of the wording. It's something like trust versus mistrust, right? So what would we call something versus another? What is it that Erickson says it is?
Internal conflict.
It's a conflict, right? It's an internal conflict. So in order to progress through that stage, we have to, what do you have to do with a conflict? What's that? Confront it, and something's going to happen, right? Is it trust versus mistrust? Which one's going to win out more? And so whichever, if the child or human comes out of that with a little more on the trust side or a little more on the mistrust side, that's going to affect personality, right? So you have to come through, you have to resolve each of these conflicts, right? Conflict resolution, you guys are familiar with those terms. Okay, so that's what Erickson thinks, and he thinks that you can't skip a stage. Every stage has to be resolved in some way or another before you can move on. Okay, so what could be some criticisms of those psychoanalytic theories? Maybe they focus too much on something, maybe there's not enough of something. What do we think? Are they easily provable? No, right? What else? What does Freud focus a lot on? What's that? You think like the id, ego, and superego? Yeah, yes, he focuses a lot on that as our personality develops. But what does he really think is such a main player for all of us? And what information do we put there? What is Freud, I mean, what are all his stages about? It's in the name. Sex, right? He focuses a lot on sex and a lot about how we all have these sort of unresolved sexual issues and sexual conflicts and things like that. So maybe a little too heavy on that side of things. So that, the fact that things aren't easily provable, right? Maybe there's not a lot of validity there. So those could be some criticisms of the psychoanalytic theories. Do you guys agree? Okay. All right, so today we're going to talk about, so that's the psychoanalytic theories of personality development. Today we're going to talk about the cognitive theories of personality development. So a different sort of heading, a different domain, right? We talked in the beginning of class about how these things fall in different domains, the physical domain, cognitive. Okay, so we're in a different domain now. So when we're talking about cognitive theories, where do they happen, our cognitive processes, so to speak? What is cognition?
Conscious,
Okay, and what do we do with our conscious?
rationalize,
Understanding.
Yeah. What's a word that we do that starts with TH? In our, what's that? Think, right? It's how we think, right? We think, we understand, we rationalize. All our active cognitive processes are going to happen in our conscious existence. So there's a couple different ways in which our thought to organize those thoughts and things and processes. Have you guys, who's familiar with a schema? With that as a term? Anybody? Okay, so a schema is a mental representation, which means it's a thought, really, right? Or a symbol maybe that you have in your head that helps you to organize your knowledge or information. So it's a way in which we organize our thoughts, basically. When I try to define this for myself and do a metaphor, does anybody study with note cards? Okay, I study with note cards. So for me, a schema would be a note card. It would be a representation, right, of some thought or something, information in a way to organize my knowledge, because that's what we're doing. How else do people study?
Reading out loud.
You read out loud? Okay.
Repetition.
What's that?
Repetition.
Repetition?
Oh, writing.
You write it out?
Yeah, I write it, like rewrite notes and stuff.
Yep. Rewrite your notes. So each sentence, each time you repeat, those can all be schemas, individual ways of organizing this knowledge, okay? When we learn new information, we get a new schema. So for every new piece of information you guys get, and it doesn't necessarily need to be information you're learning in class, what else do you learn, maybe on a daily or weekly basis? Anybody learn any new information this weekend? I mean, the answer is yes. But anybody think of anything maybe they learned? Watch a new show or a new movie? Somebody had to learn something.
learn how to get a snowmobile and stuff.
Okay, great. So you learned how to get a snowmobile unstuck. That's a new piece of information, right? Anybody else have something? Anybody cook anything, make anything? Somebody's gotta have done something, guys.
Here's one thing I learned about
Okay.
on Twitter. I mean, it's uber friendly. Apparently, Nutella, the ingredients of Nutella could is a potential cause of cancer.
Nutella?
Yeah,
Well, that's
it's
disappointing.
palm oil, I think. I don't know what it.
I wish you hadn't learned that, Ruben.
Huh?
I love Nutella.
Right.
Right, okay.
It was on my Twitter feed, and I'm like thinking, oh my
So
God.
exactly, but it's something on your Twitter feed is something that, it's a new piece of information, right?
Yeah.
something you didn't have before. So these are all new schemas. It can be the silly little things, it can be a new way to do something, something that you read online, right? Something that you heard in the news, all new pieces of information. You could learn that you didn't like a kind of cereal, right? I mean, there's lots of things that we learn. So every time we learn something, we have a new schema. So if all those things are just sort of floating around in a jumble in our consciousness, how's that going to work out for us? It's going to be super hard to remember things, to find things, right? It's like, maybe that's what you guys, maybe that's the problem we're having right now. You have all this information, but it's just drifting a little bit. You need to organize it better, okay? Does anybody, we would organize our brains in the same way some of us might organize, I don't know, a closet or your pantry or your cutlery drawer. What other things do you organize? What physical things might you want to organize? A bookshelf? Anybody organize something? Nothing? Sock drawer? You guys are just living in chaos?
Yeah, I kind of got these.
Here's the thing, apparently whenever you try to keep your room clean, it's impossible to like maintain it clean. Cause you know, it's like the organized you are in your room, the stressful it will become to stay that way. And whenever, you know, you just throw your stuff around, you just feel a little bit better.
See, now I just recently read something that said that an organized space or an organized home
Yeah.
makes you feel better because it's like you walk in and instead of this clutter and chaos, right, things are where they should be, and people find that less stressful. Does anybody, I find it more stressful to walk into a messy home or room.
Well, it's not like my whole house.
Just your room, okay.
It's just my room.
It's just a little hard to, you know, keep it clean whenever you have kids around.
Like if I'm gonna start cooking dinner, for example, I would organize the kitchen a little bit first if it were messy before I started.
Misunderstood.
What's that?
I said misunderstandable, you don't want like trash everywhere.
Well, hopefully not. I'm talking about organizing like even my, pots and pans a little bit. If I had trash everywhere, that would be, nobody really wants trash everywhere, right? How do you guys feel if you get in your car and it's like a mess? And then you're going to try to find like your notebook or your phone and everything is like thrown all over the place. You've got like gym clothes and sneakers and so some of us are more or less comfortable, and this is true, I would say, right, with some level of disorganization or not. Some people are borderline obsessive compulsive, right? Do we all at least know somebody like that has to have everything where it needs to be? And some of us are fine with chaos, so to speak, with things, you can find that shirt under a pile or whatever, and that's okay. In our brains, in your brains, what would you say? Would you say you want to be more on the organized side or the disorganized side?
We're organized.
That's how I feel too. Okay. So when we get all this new information, we get all these new schemas, we need to be able to organize them to some extent, okay? So there are two ways in which we do this. One is called assimilation. Anybody know what it means to assimilate?
You learn something, like you learn your first information and it's stuck in your head.
And how does it get stuck in your head?
You like recognize it as something else.
Yes, that's correct, right? So one way of organizing things is to take this new information that we learn and assimilate it into what we would call an existing schema. So for me, again, and everybody use your own way to remember this, right? Your own memory trick. I think of like a filing cabinet, and I think I already have a file. So I keep records of my animals, like vet bills and shop records and things like that, right, when I get those printed out. So when I got T-Rex is my most recent new animal. I have a big folder named, labeled pets, and then within that folder, I have my different animals, and they each have their own folder, right? So it was easy to find a place to put T-Rex's information, right? He gets his own folder named T-Rex, and I put that right into pets. So for me, that's how I would assimilate new information, okay? I would put it into an existing file folder. Just take that new piece of information and link it to something that's already there. In terms of something we learned in psychology, what's a way we could do that? Something that we've learned up until this point. How have you guys, anybody think of something we've learned, how you might remember it? Everybody here took Psych 150, right? You had to do that before you got here. So hopefully somewhere in your brains are some sort of schemas for some psychological knowledge. And maybe something that we've talked about up until this point was sort of reminded you of something that you've already learned. Can anybody think of an example for themselves?
Yeah. What was, I can't remember what it was, whenever you like have a list and you number it 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you like always mix up the middle and can't remember it, but you go from the top to the bottom.
Primacy and recency?
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, this made me think of that.
Okay.
Association.
Okay, so you've associated different psychological terms and mental organizations and ways of remembering things. Perfect, right? So that's taking new information, this assimilation idea maybe that you're learning today, and assimilating it into your folder where you've got information on how the brain organizes things or how we remember things. Okay, all right, so that's the idea. Now the other thing we can do, that we do, is accommodation. What does it mean to accommodate something? Allow, make room for, right? So, if we've got a new schema, a new piece of information, so for me, the information on the Nutella would be new. I didn't know anything about possible harmful side effects other than, I suppose, sugar and fat and calories, right? That sort of thing. But this information on, what did you say it was, Ruben? Palm oil or something like that? Okay, so that's new for me. So I have schemas in my head about nutrition facts, certainly, right? About what foods may or may not be good for you, right? Things to avoid. But that piece of information specifically is new. So I'm gonna make room for it. I'm gonna take an existing schema that I have that doesn't have anything about Nutella or anything like that in it, or links to cancer between palm oil, and I'm going to accommodate, I'm gonna make room for a new folder, new information to come in, okay? The same way you might put another place setting at a table, right, to accommodate somebody you weren't expecting to dinner, something like that. You'll take your table settings for 6 and open that up and accommodate for this new piece of information to fit in. Okay, so those are two of the ways in which we organize some of these new schemas. Does that make sense to people, assimilation versus accommodation? Okay. And that's really just to, again, organize that information because we need to be able to do that in order to access it. Do you guys remember learning some things about memory in Psych 150 and the different ways you organize things, right? We can't retrieve information if we don't have an idea of where it is. So when we're talking about cognitive processes in children and developing, starting in infancy and developing through childhood, they need to be able to do the same thing. Now they don't have quite the higher order processing capabilities that they will as their brains develop cognitively. As we go through these processes, they get better and better at doing so, right? So on Friday, we'll start with Piaget, with Jean Piaget, who's one of the biggest theorists we'll talk about with cognitive development. And he has infants and children going through 4 stages of cognition. All right, and as they go through these stages, getting more and more capable of organizing this information in such a way. All right, any questions? So I'll give you guys a couple minutes, but maybe just 5 or 10 minutes on Friday to organize your group projects again, and then we'll go into Piaget and cognitive theory. Okay, and the homework will be due on Friday as well. You can email me or turn it in, either is fine.
Or email us the whole website?
I did, yep, just after the link.
Do we need a textbook for that?
The textbook? No, the questions are right there. So, yep, you're fine with just the link that comes through.
Before I leave.
Say hello.